Okay, good evening class. So I'll be discussing the PT 365 for economics. We have 4 classes in total. So, and 120 odd pages. So we'll try to cover most of the conceptual areas. Factual, you'll have to read. If you have any doubts, you can ask. So 30 pages in each class, this is what we are targeting. Have you, any of you guys read the PT 365 for economics? कुछ पढ़ा है? हाँ? आज ही आई है? Or have you guys been following the current affairs, the MCR, the monthly current affairs from Region? How many of you? So basically it's a compilation from your monthly current affairs. Most of the topics are similar, so we won't face many issues. In case you have any doubts with respect to any term or what you have not understood, first I'll give everything what I'll explain through PPTs, which is not given here. Most of the things I'll be giving in PPTs, so it's not a fight that you have to write what exactly is happening. So you will get all your information from the PPTs. In case you still don't understand, I'll give you my email address. You write it to me, we'll discuss in the next class. And bear with me on speed because we have to cover a lot. In case you don't understand, please don't hesitate. Just raise your hand and we can discuss the issues. But speed will be on the higher end. I hope that is not an issue. अगर होगा तो बता देना. So we start with the first topic. It's status of government finances, state finances. So from the past 2-3 years, RBI has been coming out with the report on state finances. Why are state finances important? Why are state finances important? Finance Commission came out with the report. No, in general, why do you need to look at the state's revenue and expenditure? Financial health. Why is understanding the financial health of states important for the economy as a whole? It's a federal issue. Basically, what does the role of state is? Most of your socio-economic expenditure comes from states. If you see the important heads, major expenditure on your development and even your non-development heads comes from the state. So it's important to understand what state is doing what expenditure. For example, what is the classification of different expenditures? Revenue and capital. So it is very important to understand the status of what type of expenditure the states are doing. For example, because of the FRBM. What is FRBM? Full form nahi. What is the significance of FRBM? Control the deficit. So it is FRBM is a fiscal responsibility legislation which is controlling your fiscal deficit. Now, if you have certain fiscal responsibility legislations in place, what will happen? If the state is trying to control expenditure or control fiscal deficit, how does it control fiscal deficit? How much you can borrow, but how will it do that? It might cut down on expenditure, or there will be an. This is how you can control your fiscal deficit. Either you reduce your expenditure or you increase your revenue. Now, a lot of states, what they are doing is to control their fiscal deficits because of the fiscal responsibility legislations. They are cutting down on their capital expenditure. Now, cutting down on capital expenditure is not a good thing. Why? one by one. What is capital expenditure? So capital expenditure is towards, it will increase certain asset. It will provide you certain productive asset which will generate income for you. If you reduce your capital expenditure, that means you are not generating any asset or you are not reducing any liability. So controlling this capital expenditure, the state might not grow. And a lot of states in India, they have a very high revenue expenditure, especially in Northeast. Most of the expenditure is gone towards revenue. So to understand their expenditure trends, we need to have an understanding of the state finances. And this is why every year RBI is coming out with detailed reports on what the state finances are. What else could be the importance of state finances? Apart from generating putting in expenditure, what does state do? Or what will expenditure create? What else? Asset, capital expenditure is infrastructure. State creation of infrastructure will pull in investment, which will create employment. So again, understanding the state finances becomes important because you need to understand the expenditure patterns and also how much employment is being created on back of these. Further, state finances are important to understand your borrowing trends. What are the sources of what the state are undertaking for picking the money? Because this will have implications on interest rate in the markets. How? If certain states are borrowing higher from the market, what will happen? Crowding out of private sector. Why? Liquidity. See, if there is higher fiscal deficit of certain state government, they are borrowing more from the market. What does it will lead to? Crowd out. How does crowding out takes place? Why? One is because you will have lesser money in the market. What else? One is definitely you will have lesser funds. Why? So this is a secondary route. If states are taking more money from the market, they will have expenditure, it will lead to inflation, and then RBI may increase the interest rate. But directly what will happen? What happens when fiscal deficit increases? उससे क्या होगा? If you have to borrow more, why does crowding out takes place? Yes, if a state is borrowing more, that means people will ask higher interest rates on the debt. The yield on the government securities go up. In this case, these state development loans, the yield will go up. The yield will go up if this interest rate goes up. They are the benchmark for the market. Government security जो interest rate दे रही है, that forms the benchmark for the market. If they give a higher interest rate, that means the cost of borrowing will increase because interest rates have increased in the market. इसी phenomena को we called crowding out. One, you have lesser funds, also your interest rate increases. So this is why studying the state finances is important. Now what are the sources of state revenues? I hope this is clear why we need to study state finances. What are the sources of state revenue? One is tax, non-tax, and what are the different tax sources for the government? What are the tax sources? You have direct and indirect taxes. Apart from this, is there any? No, apart from these direct and indirect, any other source of tax revenue? Cess. Cess distribute hota hai center states. The other component is which goes in this is What devolution is coming? जो फाइनेंस कमीशन देती है. Just revise the basics. लक्ष्मीकांत में लिखा है. What is finance commission doing? It recommends how much tax will be distributed between center and state. And what else? This is called vertical devolution. And then among the states, this is your horizontal devolution. So tax sources, you are getting central devolution from the center. Otherwise, there are direct and indirect. What are the direct source of tax for the state? One is land revenue. What type of property tax? What is it called? What is the other source of direct revenue? Professional. Corporate. There is another form that is on agriculture. What type of agriculture is taxed? Agriculture is tax exempt. Plantation crops in some states, they form your direct taxes. What are your indirect taxes? One is your state component of GST. What else? What's the major form of revenue which some states, because they have banned certain things, they don't get? For example, Bihar, excise. Alcohol, banned hai, Bihar, Gujarat. So they miss out on excise. What else? Toll tax. See, toll tax is governed by the PPP arrangements. One is vehicle registration tax. You have electricity. These are all outside. Electricity is outside GST. And also you have value added or sales tax on certain commodity. This is your source of tax revenues for the state. Now what do you think is the maximum out of these? From where is the state getting the maximum source of revenue? What's the second highest? Third? Land revenue बहुत छोटा है. Property transactions पे जो stamp duty and registration fees. These are the top three. Sorry, VAT ज़्यादा है. VAT is 24. Then excise, then stamp duty. This is vehicle is 6% and electricity is 3%. These are your sources of tax. Non-tax and grants, I think it's clear. We don't have to discuss. Disinvestment and all, everything. User fees. Now let us see the trends. First of all, the report shared by RBI on the state finances, the theme this time was how the local governments have performed after the pandemic or duration of the pandemic. We are not discussing the response of local governments during the pandemic because it's mostly important for mains. The report has in-depth detailed how different state governments, the various urban local bodies and panchayats had dealt with pandemic and what was the impact on their revenue and expenditure. They have detailed that component very well in a very significant portion of the report. That is the theme of the report. That is your how local governments have acted to the pandemic. But the initial half of the report has talked about the state government's performance on various indicators. These all the graphs we'll be discussing. Majorly what UPSC has been asking in prelims is the trends. They'll not ask you exact figures on what the fiscal deficit was or what exactly was revenue deficit. Exact figures, debt to GDP and all, that would not be asked. Major things that can be asked from this is how the trends have been in the previous 5 years. for the states, how the fiscal deficit has been performing, what is the interest payments, what is debt to GDP ratio, all these things, trends can be asked. So majorly trends you have to watch for all things, sources of revenue, sources of finance, everything for financing the deficit, everything majorly important is how they have been moving in the past 3 years or 5 years. So this is your major deficit indicators. In the last 2 years, it has decreased from 4.7 to 3.7. The FRBM target for a state is that they have to achieve 3% of GDP. This has been last 2 years performance, 4.7 to 3.7 it has reduced. So if you get from what has happened in the previous 5 years, it was increasing to a certain extent and then it decreased. So the question is, if the state's fiscal deficit has been increasing consistently in the past 5 years or has been decreasing consistently in the past 5 years. So a lot of time what happens is, when we are seeing certain trends, what we try to find out if there was certain disruption in any of the years. For example, previous questions mein jo aaya hai, we see the disruption year such as 2008, when we had the global financial crisis. So that year you could have increase in the fiscal deficit. Similarly, now the pandemic struck. Government had to increase its expenditure. How is the government trying to increase the expenditure? Higher fiscal deficit, 9%, 6%. कहाँ 3.6, 3.8 range में चल रहा था, now it is 9%, 6%. So you try to find if there is any disruption year due to which there would be certain changes. So here 2019-20 and 2021 mein you had the pandemic, and that is why you have significant shooting of your fiscal deficit. Now when the economic activity is being restored, you have fall in the fiscal deficit. I hope this is clear. This is how we are going to discuss all the major indicators, how they have performed. मैं धीरे बोल लेता हूँ. Technical. So this is in figures. 2.5 to 2.6, 3.2 to 4.7. So it was consistently increasing. Now it has decreased. This is your fiscal deficit percentage of GDP. Revenue deficit, again, consistent, increasing, decreased, increased, again decrease. So there is no fixed pattern for the past 5 years for the revenue deficit. The figures above is in lakh crores. The other is in parenthesis, this is your GDP to percentage to GDP. 2 years they have analyzed for which the numbers were available without the provisional and the revised estimates. That is 2008-19-20 and 2018-19, how it has changed. Change from 2.45 to 2.58, the fiscal deficit has increased. Why did it increase? There were two major loss of revenue. One was the own taxes and the other is the center devolution. These two major components had reduced, and that is why the fiscal deficit increased. This is the reason why it happened between 2018-19 and 2019-20, because of reduction in two major components. One was a reduction in its own tax revenue and the center devolution. Rest all, there has been a positive improvement. The same figures for each. You can see 2018-19, the state own revenue, especially own tax revenue, has decreased as a percentage of GDP. It decreased from 6.4 to 6%. In nominal terms, it has increased, but at a percentage of GDP, it has decreased. So this is again your trend for the past 5 years on the various revenue receipts and the non-debt capital receipts for the state governments. You have to analyze all with respect to the previous 5 years, how it is increasing. You can see 6.4 to 6 to 6.3 to 7.2, consistently increasing. And this state-owned tax is the largest source of revenue for the government. Tax sources से सबसे ज़्यादा पैसा आता है state के पास. More than 40-45% of the revenue which the states get, they get it from tax sources, mostly from their own tax revenue. Then expenditure pattern. How has the state expenditure moved? How revenue expenditure and capital expenditure. So you can see capital expenditure in the 2 years, this was a significant reduction. The states, they were trying to control their fiscal deficit. They could not control the revenue expenditure, and mostly control was there on capital. Ye bhi kam hua, but not that significant. If you see in nominal terms, it has increased. Nominal terms, both as this 4.87 to here, it has decreased. This has increased in nominal terms, but percentage decrease hua hai. So the state governments are not able to control their revenue expenditure, but to control the fiscal deficit, they are reducing their capital. And it has bounced back here again. Why did the state increase the capital expenditure here after 2019-20? To increase the economic activity. After the pandemic, all the major expenditures, they had been substituted. Consumption expenditure has been controlled by the people, they are not spending. The industry is not investing. Why? No demand. Uncertainty in the economy, they don't know when the lockdown will be there, when will be the next wave. So nobody is ready to take money and invest in the economy. And then you have only one. Or because globally it had affected, so you did not have a lot of exports. And therefore, the government only could do the expenditure, and you had significant increases in your capital expenditure. So again, trends would be more important here. You'll have to analyze. If you don't remember the figures, you'll have to analyze what was happening in the economy. You have to follow certain disruptions. And one thing to be understood here is, this is very difficult to reduce. Why? Fixed. Why is it fixed? Salaries, pensions, they are mostly committed expenditures, which the state has to do. Another component which has been increasing in the previous year is your interest payments on previous debts. If you see interest payments, how they have increased significantly in the... Now this is, why is the rising interest payments not a good sign for the state finances? More borrowings. Exactly. If you have higher interest payments, that means you are paying interest on the previous debts. If you have to borrow, you are not creating any useful activity. You are just repaying your previous debts. Another indicator for deteriorating of state finances is this: increase of the interest payments. That is, you have to pay the previous debts. This is consistently increasing in the years. Shows that the state are not able to generate enough revenue. Interest payments are increasing. Now, what are the major sources of finance for the state? How do you finance the fiscal deficit? What else? One is market borrowings. Ways and means. Ways and means is the emergency mechanism. What else? Can the states borrow from outside? They need permission from the central government. Why do the states need permission from the central government? One is security given by. Is there any mention in the constitution about this? If state have to borrow, yes. What is Article 293? Why? Or is it about international only? Domestic also. If states have any outstanding loans from the center, to take any borrowing further in the market, they have to take permission from the center. And for the external borrowings also, they have to take permission, because the sovereign guarantee comes from the center and not the state. This is the reason why states have to take permission from the center for borrowing even in the domestic market. What are the sources? Borrowing from Reserve Bank, that is ways and means advances. What else? It's a major source of financing. Now it is reduced in the last few years. State development loans is how you borrow from the market. वो आप issue करते हो securities. Any market borrowing has to happen through bonds. The market will not just give you money in return of anything. The small security, provident fund, the small savings funds, NSSF. This is how the states borrow. After the recommendation of the 14th Finance Commission, 4 states, barring 4 states, all states, they have been stopped from taking from small savings. Recently, the government reduced the interest rate on provident fund. पढ़ा है न्यूज़ में? 8.1. What is the implication? Less return. Why has the government done that? Major problem why the governments have reduced the interest rate on small savings is because they face competition with bank deposits. People will not deposit in other sources. They will deposit to provident fund. If the people are not depositing to banks, banks will not cut down their lending rates because their cost of funds is high. Agar 8% provident fund, a bank has to offer similar rate of interest. Otherwise, people will not deposit with banks. And if bank is taking deposit at higher interest rates, they will not be able to cut down their lending rates. And nobody will be able to invest in the economy. And this is beneficial for the government because if the interest rate is reduced, the governments are borrowing at lesser interest rate from the small saving funds. Apart from your market borrowing, which is the major source of revenue, major source of financing for the state governments. In 2015-16, the major source of funding, if you see before this, major source of funding used to be NSSF small savings. They used to get higher rate of interest from the market. Now, after the Finance Commission recommendations, they are shifting more towards the market and lesser towards the NSSF. In 1970s, only 15% of the states borrowing was from market. Mostly it was from your provident funds, small savings. Now it is completely dominated by market borrowings. You can see how high, 94.8% shift after the pandemic. From 80% to 94% was taken from the market. This is the major source of finance for the government. The masala bonds, it is after permission from the state government. Or in fact, इसके ऊपर controversy भी हुई थी काफी. Relevance is this only that you cannot borrow from the external market without the permission from the center. And the issue why? Because if the Kerala government defaults, it is the center government who will pay. Guarantee sovereign hai. So that is why this issue of taking permission from the central government before you can issue any masala bonds or issue any securities outside. Central government. And that is why the whole controversy that central government, why was not the permission given? Yeah, so it is the central government, not the RBI. Unconstitutional, you can say because 293 says central government permission because it has to take loans from the outside. If there is outstanding loan in the domestic market, externally you have to take permission from central. So they were just trying to negotiate, yes, we have taken permission from RBI because we have sustainable finances. But then again, you have to take it from the center. The recommendations of the 14th, the NSSF has been stopped apart from few states, Delhi, Madhya Pradesh, Kerala and Arunachal Pradesh. The NSSF financing facility has been reduced. The states are not allowed after the recommendation of this to borrow from NSSF, the small savings. Only 4 states are allowed, and that is why now you are seeing higher share of states borrowing from the market. Because now the Finance Commission has said you cannot borrow from the small saving fund. Another recent mechanism to help the state finances, the center allowed states to have additional borrowing of 2% for this year till May 2020. In fact, this was extended also. Why do you think they extended this limit, gave them additional borrowing? Due to the pandemic and 293 permission required. So this additional limit of 2% which you can borrow, this was based on certain condition. 0.5% आपका unconditional है. Rest 1% is based on these 4 reforms. These are certain facts which can be asked in prelims. They can give you a statement that the center extended the state borrowing limits and it was unconditional. No. Just 0.5% was unconditional, 1% was linked to these 4 reforms. These 4 reforms can be asked. The rest 5%, if you complete any of the 3 reforms, you will get the 2% additional borrowing from the market. Because of the revenue deficit nature. It's no specific logic given. In fact, the logic given why was that they are not asking it to borrow from National Small Savings because it's people's money and you are not responsible. So better borrow from the market, face market discipline. Here you can fix the interest rate. So it's better to enforce market discipline than do this. Further, the ways and means advances limit was also extended. What is ways and means advances? What are ways and means advances? So temporary mismatch, so what? You know, till 1997, how we were financing the fiscal deficit? How was the center or the state financing the fiscal deficit till 1997? 1997 is the year when ways and means advances are introduced. We had monetization of deficit, that is, RBI was printing money. Now this was stopped after 1997. Why? Why is this not a good thing? No? Trust nahi rahega. Okay, one definitely is this. What is the major problem for the economy? Inflation. This is the most inflationary thing that can happen in the economy. UPSC has asked this question twice in prelims, 2013 and last year. Which of the following steps lead to inflation? सबसे ज़्यादा inflation होगी when you are printing money. Now this was stopped in 1997 because of the high inflation and also because the government was not facing any discipline on the fiscal side. They were getting free money from the RBI. After 1997, we introduced ways and means advances, which was to be in the form of loans. Now you will have to pay certain interest rate. This will not be free. And this is a temporary loan to have, if there is any mismatch in your finances, you can borrow from the RBI. So this ways and means advances in an option given to the center and state. Now it is a loan, which was not the case earlier. This loan has certain limits, how much you can take. So this was relaxed, this was given, this was extended by 60% by the RBI because of the pandemic. The ways and means advances were extended. 60% limit was enhanced for the states. Another thing which was done is, you also have an overdraft facility. These ways and means advances are temporary loans given for specific time period, for example 15 days. If you need over, that is called your overdraft facilities after your time period has expired. This overdraft facility was also extended during the pandemic. The overdraft, the moment was relaxed, state can continue to be in the overdraft for increase from 14 to 21 days. Earlier, when your limit has expired, for example, you are getting this loan for 15 days. इसके बाद आप 14 days तक और overdraft में रह सकते हो. Now this extra 14 days has been changed to 21 days. You don't have to repay in those 14 days. Now you have extra 7 days. So both your limit and your duration for your overdraft was increased during the pandemic. The states, first, the center allowed it by giving it 2% extra borrowing limits, and then the RBI also gave them a special window for ways and means advances, 60% the amount and the overdraft facility. 31 March 2022 is the end date. ये 6 महीने तक extend हुई थी. Now the last extension has been given till 31st March 2022. The extension of both these things. Again, features of any of these can be asked in your prelims. One of the important things here we have to notice is, please read the statement carefully. A lot of times they interchange the statement central government or RBI. That the central government did this ways and means, or the RBI increased the additional borrowing limits, imposed certain conditions. So be careful while reading the statement, because the rest of the fact might be true. If government or RBI, a lot of times they have done this in the paper. When the inflation is increasing, what the government or RBI will do. So this was relaxations given for the state finances. This is your general trend of debt and burden, interest burden. What is the difference between fiscal deficit and debt? The earlier trends we have discussed the fiscal deficit to GDP. Now this is debt. Yes. Fiscal deficit is a flow variable. It has a time component. Fiscal deficit is 1 year deficit borrowing. Debt is an accumulation of your borrowings over the year. So this is the trend with respect to your fiscal deficit. Even the previous years, you see, it has been consistently increasing up to a higher level. Right now, it's 31% debt to GDP for these states. What has the FRBM specified the limits for debt to GDP? Combined is 60%. What is for center? And for? And you can see where the limit is, where they are standing right now. Even the interest payments, it had seen an increase, thoda fall hua hai. So these graphs are important to understand that consistently increase, decrease nahi ho raha hai. Again, figures are not that important. It's important to understand the trend. So the question would be how interest payments have been increasing in the past 5 years, decreasing in the past 5 years. This is how they ask questions on trends. They're not asking specific figures. 31% is debt to GDP for states. What is debt to GDP for center? 59. 48. ये इतना ओवरशूट कर रहे हैं, सेंटर तो और ज्यादा. हर कुछ रोज नया कुछ आ रहा है मोदी जी के लिए. %. This is your center debt to GDP. The state is 31%. The trend, I hope, is clear. This is the trend with respect to your debt. Market loans being the major component, and they have been consistently increasing. The market borrowings have been consistently increasing in all these years. What is following is what they are borrowing from the NSSF. You can see consistent decrease in borrowing from the NSSF, and market borrowing is increased. Why is this happen? Because of the recommendations of the Finance Commission, that you have to borrow from the market and not from your small savings. How? In fact, this is increasing their debt burden. So why would any state try to increase its debt burden? See, NSSF is an accumulated amount which they are doing it. NSSF, what they can do is they can reduce the interest rate. Right now, what the center has done, it has reduced the interest rate on the small savings. So this is what you can do. You can reduce it. No government will try to increase the NSSF small savings fund. कम करेंगे ताकि cost of borrowing कम हो. Market is something you cannot accumulate. You cannot manipulate because market will not be ready to give you at that interest rate. If you are borrowing more, nobody will be ready to give you at a lesser interest rate. They will demand a higher yield if fiscal deficit is increasing. Shows that government is irresponsible. So nobody will be ready to give you in the market, and that is why the Finance Commission made the recommendation that you face the competition of the market. यहाँ जो आपके accumulated funds हैं उनसे पैसा मत लो. See what you are borrowing from the market. This will enforce a discipline on you. You will borrow less. If you borrow less, you will get lesser interest rate money. So this is a consistent trend. Internal debt mostly borrowed from your outside sources, that is market, and not from your NSSF. So this is with respect to your state finances. Majorly important what the trend has been. Again, theme was local governments. A major section of the report, if you see, we have discussed this in one of the current affair class also, that how various state governments, what steps they did for countering the pandemic. So they've given the performance of a lot of cities and how the urban local bodies performed during the pandemic. Mostly important for mains. You can get a lot of content on the local self-government and urban local bodies' role in the pandemic. First half, discussing the state finances. Any doubts from this topic? Okay, what is the reasons for poor performance of state? The state finances are not in a good picture. What is the reason for this? They've discussed in an infographic. I'll just give you a brief overview. Populist policies. One of the major problem is the state's capacities to collect tax. This administration with respect to the tax revenue is very poor in most of the states. One of the examples, major state component is stamp duty and registration fees. There's major loss of revenue here. Can anyone explain what is the problem here? Yes. So whenever there is a property transaction happening between the two people, you have a registry. A registry mostly they do on circle rate, which is very less than what the market rate is. And if you are registering on the circle rate, इसका percentage ही आपका stamp duty है, and इसका percentage ही आपका registration fees है. So a massive loss of revenue for the states. आपकी property valued है, if you are buying it for say 50 lakh rupees. The circle rate which is given by the government for each area. What is the circle rate? Yes. So how do you decide the market value, or how do you decide the value of any property? Government, based on the location and other factors, gives you a circle rate. For example, if a property is located in Karol Bagh, this is the circle rate. If it is located in Saket, the circle rate would be different. This is the government defined rate for any property. But it is not same as the market value. Market value is always higher than the circle rate because of the higher demand for land. If you are registering it on circle rate, a major loss of revenue for the states. And this is one example I'm giving you. In collection of all these revenues, there is massive corruption. Poor capacity of the state bureaucracy, the state administration to collect this revenue. Therefore, state is losing out revenue sources. What are the other problems? Measure to counter stronger bureaucracy, collection. See, why do you hear about income tax raids or ED raids? Because people know there is wrongdoing done. आपने दिखाई property, क्योंकि ये market rate पे आपकी transaction, and that means transaction has happened in cash. There are a lot of ways to check this corruption. The point is, क्योंकि यहाँ पे जो registration कर रहा है उसको fees मिलती है. The patwari or the local bureaucrat here doing the registration, he is earning money here. Everybody knows कि property, if you see the registration, if you buy any new property, आपका करोल बाग में registration होगा 1 lakh rupees per hectare जो इतना square yard होगा, और market rate would be 4 lakhs, 5 lakhs. Everybody knows the real value, but still registration is पे state is losing out revenue. Real value is, see, if you don't take it as 1 lakh, के circle rate पे तो यही है. So if you don't accept this value, right? You said circle rate, I am not going to pay you. There is always higher demand for the land. Land is a very scarce resource. You always have people who will pay higher for that land. And they know what the market rate. This is something which the people know that this is happening. Even when they will get it registered, क्योंकि जो खरीदने आएगा, if you want to borrow, you are not paying it in white because you can't show that this is the income you have earned. देन इसलिए वो भी सर्कल रेट पे ही करवाना चाहेगा, because then he has to show how did he earn that income, and that is why he'll pay in black. Now if this type of transactions happen, this is just one example I'm giving you, the state will lose revenue. This is one of the reasons also. The stamp duty is very high, registration fees is high. That is why people do is they get the lesser land registered. You won't have the complete registry of say 100 square yards. You will have lesser 80, 70 का registration होगा, possession पूरे का होगा. This is also one of the reasons higher stamp duty. But a lot of states have reduced the stamp duty. But still you cannot counter this because there's a massive difference between circle rate and market rate. So the capacity for the state to collect these taxes, this is very poor. And if you see on the lower end in the urban local bodies and panchayats, all the more poor they can't collect taxes. Because the panchayats or the urban local bodies, the people there are known. So the house tax hai or your water tax, everything you're not paying. So again, state is losing out on revenue. They can increase, definitely circle rates should be periodically done. Again, see, if you want to catch these transactions, bureaucracy which wants to work, these things can be stopped. So this is why I talked about state capacity. It's the implementation mechanism which needs to be robust. Then only you can collect tax. See, one major thing is, if you see, one of the tax collection was the octroi before GST. So if the figure is high, you will have a deal between the inspector and the person who is traveling. Chalan ka na 2000 chalan, you can have a deal. So if the person who is not ready to deal with you, if he is giving you a chalan, why do policemen stop and then they talk for 15 minutes? If you have done a wrongdoing, सीधा चालान काट के खोलते गाड़ी में दो. This is what they should be doing, or even eliminate them. Have speed cameras. Have mechanisms which can send you chalan online. You eliminate the human interface. They talk to you because 2000 chalan they will try to bargain. 500 de do, 1000 de do. Then you will say, please sir, 300 ही है, Google Pay कर दो. So this is why it is the state capacity which is affecting, and the major source of revenue is its own tax revenue, own tax collection. वहीं पे it is not able to collect. Rest all are very small sources. Non-tax grants from center, they are not very major source of funds which are for the state. Major is this only. A lot of states are missing out here. Excise, VAT, electricity, major problem. You're not able to collect. What else is the problem? Lower tax collection because of capacity. See, that lower tax collection, that is because of certain economic disruption. So that you cannot say that is a problem. Because see, if you see interest payments, they have been increasing throughout years. So what's the problem which has stayed for so many years? State are not taxing agriculture. Vote bank politics, mostly because of your populist schemes. One of the major is your farm loan waivers. And other populist scheme is also your the Discom issue. What happened under the Uday scheme? What happened under the Uday? This is the Assurance Yojana, the Ujjwal Discom Assurance Yojana. What happened under the Uday scheme? The states took the debt of the Discoms, provided they did certain reforms. Why do the Discoms have debt? Discoms debt kyun? Why is the problem in the electricity sector? Discoms are in debt throughout. The whole reason is that you are not charging the right amount for your electricity. Who sets the price for electricity? Government who? The State Electricity Regulatory Commission. The SERC sets the prices for the electricity in the state. Now this price is not revised because of the vote bank politics. Consider the Aam Aadmi Party government. Wherever they are going, they are saying free electricity. Who is going to pay for it? दिल्ली में तो आपको revenue का your expenditure is less because law and order is not your problem. So you don't have to pay your police. Other states this will become a problem because who is going to pay if you are giving them for free? And then discoms will not improve. Discom का debt तो ले लिया states ने, but there was no improvement in the discoms. So these type of populist schemes where the states are doing a lot of expenditure without getting anything in return. What is a farm loan waiver? The states, a lot of states promise farm loan waivers. Waive the loans. Who is paying for it? The state governments has to pay. Banks nahi lete, wo state governments have to pay. And you see in both the schemes, both Uday and this, the state government is not getting anything in return. Money is being spent, but you are not creating any activity. There is no development activity that is being done. And a lot of these schemes are being run. One other scheme recently, 2 states government have started. Rajasthan and Chhattisgarh. In fact, that was a major, yes, the old pension scheme. This was a major election. The whole scenario was there in UP also. Tabhi wo postal votes mein Samajwadi got higher votes. They promised that we are going to bring the old pension scheme. Under the old pension scheme, the government has to give more. And now if you'll see the finances for both Rajasthan and Chhattisgarh, how much more revenue expenditure will be because of the contribution from the states towards these pensions. So these are certain populist schemes which lead to problems in the state finances. What else? Yes, one of the other problems is your divisible pool is being reduced. See, this is what is distributed by the Finance Commission between the center and state. Now this is being reduced because center government is taking a lot of money through cess and surcharge, and cess and surcharge are not part of your divisible pool. So that is why you are not getting lesser revenue to the states. There is another problem which the states government complain, they have started complaining now. IGST, there are variations in collection of IGST. Yes. What is the problem with GST? GST, you cannot change the rates without consulting the. And this is the reason most of the products tax will be from the GST Council and the states have no role. Why the states were reluctant to give alcohol to GST? They wanted to control the taxation on alcohol. It is one of the major sources of revenue. Now, since the coming of the GST, the states have lost their autonomy. They can't increase or decrease the taxes as per their own requirements. It will happen through the GST Council. So states have ceded all their space to the GST Council. What else is a problem? And this problem will start from this year. GST compensation. What is the issue with GST compensation? They had promised that your revenue will be increasing 14%. If it doesn't, we will pay you. The GST compensation cess. Cess will be collected and you will be paid compensation. What is the issue with starting this year? The problem will happen. This was the issue till now. Pandemic में पहली बार हुआ, cess compensation, cess was less, the state's compensation was more. So they found out a way that center is going to borrow on your behalf and give you money. This was the mechanism which was given to the states. Earlier the center said, you yourself borrow, we will give you the interest rate. The other thing was given, we will borrow and give you the money. That was the problem which was solved. Now the problem is compensation ends 2022. It was for 5 years only. Now you won't get any compensation if there are shortfalls in GST. This year that problem can start because your GST compensation is now over. Very difficult. See, this is still under negotiation. And the way the government works is very difficult. You cannot say, but compensation right now ending. Earlier also was a problem because the lesser collection in the cess. So this was your whole comprehensive on state finances. I hope this is clear. How does a government security form the benchmark? We'll discuss next topic, that is. The next is government securities. What is the difference? This is up to undated. Only the center can issue T-bills. The states cannot. States only issue dated, called the state development loans. ये already UPSC पूछ चुका है. That if state governments can issue treasury bills or not. State governments cannot issue treasury bills. They can only issue state development loans. Those are dated securities more than 1 year maturity. Center can issue T-bills. What is the major defining feature of T-bills? Why is it called? They're called zero coupon. They are issued at a discount. Why are they issued at a discount? Why they have to be issued at discount? सब रट्टे मारे हुए हैं. Huh? Any government security, see, this is a normal bond, be it a government security, anything. It will have a price. For example, it will have a face value. For example, it's a 100 rupees bond. This is the face value. It will issue a interest rate. For example, issued at 5%. These are the two major features of a bond. One is face value, one is your coupon rate, how much interest you are getting on the bond. At maturity, what will you get? $105. Why is this a zero coupon T-bill? This is 0%. The coupon rate is 0%. And that is why they are not sold at 100 rupees. They will be sold at 95, 96 or any of the values. This is called, they are issued at, and this becomes your yield or the amount which you get from the bond. Why? See, these T-bills are short-term bills. For example, 91 days, 182 days. And they come with a sovereign guarantee. इसमें कोई risk नहीं है. That is why they are able to sell at zero bond, because they are backed by the government. And that is the reason why it becomes a benchmark, because these are the safest instruments. This is the reason why they are called gilt-edged, because they are backed by the sovereign. किसी भी country में इससे ज़्यादा safe secure instrument नहीं है. Because if you buy a bond from someone or if you take equity from certain company, everything can fail. Your money can be lost. This is backed by your government. अगर default करेगी फिर तो सभी खत्म. That is why they've been issued at zero coupon and sold at a discount value. Now there are certain mechanisms with respect to bonds. Previous years we have seen a lot of questions. So a bond, for example, government security will have a face value and will have a coupon rate. This is a normal dated security we are talking. What is the bond price? Why? Or what exactly is a bond price? It could be 95, it could be 105, it could be 110. So one value is the face value of the bond. Bond price is the price at which it is sold in the market. It could be anything. Depends on the market conditions. It could be anything. What would be the yield of the bond? bond price minus, I'm not asking about the formula. What is the significance of yield? What is yield? Is the return which you get from a bond. For example, on maturity, what will be the yield? 5 rupees is you earn at maturity. Now, yield is directly proportional to what the coupon rate is and inversely proportional to your bond price. How this is derived, I'll just explain. But these are the two major things which you have to remember. Directly related to what the coupon rate is and indirectly to your bond price. If bond price increases, yield will fall. If bond price increases, yield will fall. If it decreases, yield will rise. Inversely proportional to bond price. Now, why does this happen? यही अभी derive होगा. So if the interest rate in the market is 8%, the interest rate which you get in the market is 8%. You invest 100 rupees, what will you get? 108. Bond pay you were investing 100 at maturity, what you are getting? Nobody will be ready to buy this bond because they are getting more in the market. The banks are offering 8%. The government is offering 5%. Nobody is going to buy that. When will the people rush towards the bond, or when will the people buy the bond? When the interest rate is lower or higher? ज़्यादा interest लेना पड़ेगा. This cannot, when the bond is issued, this cannot change. Then what will change? Now you have to have a yield of 8 rupees to make the bond at par with the interest rate. Now when can you have an yield of 8 rupees? When the bond is sold for not for 100 but 90, then only you can get a return of 8 rupees. Now what if interest rate decreases from 8% to 6%? Or first increases to 8% to 10%? Bond price will have to further fall to 95. तभी 10 रुपए मिलेंगे. So if the interest rate on the market increases, bond prices fall. This is one. Market interest rate increases, bond price will fall. What if the interest rate decreases? Bond prices will increase from 97 to 99 to give you 6 rupees. So if interest rate decreases, your bond price will increase. एक तो this is an important equation which you should know, that bond prices and interest rates move in the opposite direction. I hope this is also clear how yield and bond prices move in opposite direction. If bond prices are increasing, your yield will fall. If bond prices are decreasing, yield will rise. This is clear how interest rate and bond prices move. Now, how is bond prices or your yield linked to your stock market? If the yield on bond market increases, if the yield on bond increases, what will happen to your stock market? You will have stock market will fall. Why? You have either you can buy a bond or a equity on the stock market. If you have a better yield here, people will invest less. Then why else will the stock market fall? One is definitely you have shift towards government bonds. Because they are offering higher yield, your stock market will fall because people will now be invested towards government bonds and not towards equities. Share market में invest नहीं करेंगे, they will invest in government bonds. What is the other reason why the stock market will fall? Why? How? So you are assuming that stock market increase will be company investing towards good funds and government investing will be in non-productive. This is your assumption. Not necessarily true. Government securities, that means government is borrowing more. Now, does it mean that this stock market, the second step kit will use for non-productive purposes? Maybe, may not be. So this you cannot say with surety. See what happens if your yield increases. If the yield is increasing, that means what is the government has to pay? The cost of the government debt burden is increasing. Yield on the government bond is increasing, that means the debt burden is increasing. You are getting higher yield on the government security. The government security is giving you higher yield, that means cost of borrowing will also increase in the market. If government is giving such high interest, the deposits on banks will also go up. If the deposit rate goes up, they have to increase their rates of loans also. That means it is becoming difficult to raise money. And that is why your valuations of the stock will fall. Because your cost of borrowing has gone up. जो कंपनी की परफॉर्मेंस की वजह से भी शेयर मार्केट चलता है, not just because of speculation. For example, right now Paytm का स्टॉक क्यों टैंक कर रहा है? Because of his relations with the Chinese and a lot of other things, because of its unstable performance of the company. So if the corporates are not getting money, their valuations fall and stock market will fall. So I hope this is clear. Yield will increase the government burden, it will lead to higher cost. Because any other which the government issues, any new bond which the government issues, it has to issue at a higher interest rate. That is why its debt burden is increasing. And if your yield curves are very high, that means cost of borrowing, rest will have to follow that. That is why cost of borrowing in the market increases. That is why we say a higher fiscal deficit, yield will rise. Because you don't have trust in the government. So government has to give you higher yield. Then only you will borrow. Higher fiscal deficit also means higher yield. Last year they had asked a question, how is the government yield related to various economic indicators? Now what will happen in a recession? Will the yield increase or decrease? Or wait, what will happen in case of inflation? What will happen in case there are inflationary trends in the economy? There is expectation of inflation. Yield will decrease. Why? Decrease, increase, क्यों? It will increase. When you have inflation in the economy, your yield will increase. Why? Yes. So how does this happen? If you have inflation, for example 8%, If someone is going to invest in certain bond, they will want a higher return than 8%. So if there are expectations of inflation, of higher inflation, you will demand a higher yield to cover the inflation. Now, how does this operate? What is Fisher law? See, it's very basic. If you have inflation tendencies, will you have demand for the bond? If you have, there is more and more inflation, will people try to save or people try to spend? Save. Your demand for bond will? What will, if the bond of demand for certain item reduces, what happens to the price? किसी चीज की डिमांड कम होती है, उसके प्राइस को क्या होता है? If the bond price decreases, what happens? See, most of the government bond or any bond, you see from what the demand for the bond is, what the price, how price is moving. The moment you are able to know the demand and the price situation, you will be able to relate it to the yield. They move in the opposite direction. This is we have already established. Yes, so demand will be less. They will save with themselves, save not in the bond, because this is not, they don't have the money to invest there. This is the speculative demand for money. People either have the option to hold cash or bond. ये speculative demand of money यही होती है. Why do we have a liquidity trap? Because people try to hold cash. If there is inflation, people will keep this and not this. I hope inflation and this is clear. What happens during recession? If there is inflation in the economy, there are expectations price is going to rise. Will you buy an instrument like a bond, or you will buy will keep your money with yourself? How does liquidity trap happen? But this is also if the bond is already at a lower price, inflation, the price will increase. Sorry, interest rate inflation will move opposite. So if in the future there will be inflation, interest rate will go down. Interest rate will go up. See, when there's inflation expectations, your interest rates, they have a tendency to go up. If interest rate goes up, bond price will go down. So in this case, when you know in the future bond prices will go down, why will you hold an asset whose price is going down? So you will not hold bond, you will hold cash. You will never hold. This is how a liquidity trap happens, because the price of the asset is going to reduce in the market. You know that interest rate will go up, bond price will go down. I will face the capital losses. So I will never try to hold a bond. This is how you enter into a liquidity trap. This is why this will happen. You will try to hold cash and this will happen. See, inflation, there are expectations that interest rate, you again think from the same perspective, you will never want to invest in certain asset जिसकी value गिरेगी आगे जाके. Why will you buy 100 rupees something which you know the expectations it is going to fall? See, if the rupee is losing value, you are going to get higher interest rate in the future. So you will try to deposit in the higher interest rate with the banks. You will not hold an issue, तब तक आपके पास पैसे नहीं होंगे, and you will be holding that asset whose asset has lost value. आपने एक 100 रुपए की चीज खरीदी जिसकी आज की वैल्यू 90 है. Why will you buy certain things which you know whose value is going to go down? You know interest rate will increase, so you can put that money there. That is why the speculative demand is your preference for holding cash. See, that is a completely different thing which you are opening up. You never know what is the performance of the company during inflation, because during inflation, what is the cost of borrowing is also going up. So the valuations might go down. So here you have two options, either to buy to do it in bonds or in cash. So you will try to hold cash more and not invest in bonds or in equity, because you never know how the performance of the companies will be. So that is why you cannot create that relation. So this is what we are trying to say. If there is inflation, your yield is rising. This is what we are trying to say. Yield will be rising because then only you will invest in bond because it is giving you a better return. Yes. When the yield will rise, now the bond has become more attractive to you. The question we were trying to understand here, how will the inflation impact the yield? What you are saying is the next step. Now if the yield has increased, should I buy a bond or not? Just focus on the first thing, that if the inflation rises, what will happen to the yield? It will have to give you more to cover for the inflation cost because the demand is less when there is inflation. So demand will be less, bond price will fall, yield will be more. Now you will find the bond attractive because now the interest cost of borrowing has increased in the market and that is why they are impressive. Yield increase means cost of borrowing increases. What is yield? Yield is how much return your bond is giving. If your bond is giving you a good return, all the other instruments will have to offer you a higher return. And if they have to offer a higher return, that means their cost of funds is increasing. If bank is offering you higher money on deposits, deposits is how the bank get money. No, that is simple. They will not invest in a bond because they know the bond prices are going to reduce. You will never hold an asset whose price is going to reduce in the future. If you buy, say, a car or house, anything, you know if the price is going to get reduced, you will never buy that. Because the capital loss will be very much high. So वो कुछ % interest के लिए आप वो capital gains loss नहीं ले लोगे पूरे bond के ऊपर. The capital loss on the bond. So I hope this is clear how inflation will lead to higher yields. What else have we done? Higher yields will lead to fall in stock markets and also higher fiscal deficit will again push because the government is seen as irresponsible, you will require higher money to cover for their debts. What happens during a recession? Yield will decrease or increase. Why will the yield decrease during a recession? In a recession, you have an economic downturn, no instrument you have faith on. What is the only reliable instrument in the market? Government security, backed by the government. Its demand will rise. What will happen? Bond price. And when the growth returns, when the growth will return, when you have this, when your economy is booming, you have higher expectations or higher returns from your stock market. Because now you have expectations of growth, that now investment will happen, companies will put in money. This is why you will try to invest in instruments which will offer you good returns. So opposite of recession, if there is a high booming economy, you will have higher yields because it has to compete with the stock markets. So when the growth returns, your yield increases. I hope these all relations are clear. Last year they asked a very easy question on how the yield is moving with respect to the performance of the economy. They did not ask how it will increase or decrease. They just asked how the yield is related to what all factors. So increase, decrease, causation and everything can be asked also. Now what will happen if there is an outflow of funds? Stock markets will crash. How is FPI related to money supply? FPI is your dollars. So if FPI outflows is happening, where have they invested? In the stock market. The moment there will be outflow, there will be crash. Why is this? Or why is the FPI outflow happening? Recently, what is the reason why FPI outflow is happening? If the US government bond yield increases or their interest rate increases, you will have outflow of funds. They've also asked a question on if the yield on the US government bond increases, what will happen in your economy? Agar yield wahan badi, that means people can get good returns there. If they are getting good returns there, they will pull out the money from your stock market and you will have a crash. Right now, a lot of investments have been taken out from the Indian markets. Why? This is what is called your taper tantrum. After the 2008 financial crisis, the developed economies followed a quantitative easing. What is quantitative easing? Easy money policy, money at. Now this they are saying we are going to increase or कुछ ज़्यादा भी increase हो सकता है. The moment this happens, interest rate increases, people will go back in their own economies and put the money in their economy, taking out money from the Indian markets. And what is this crash leading to if there is outflow? How will the rupee movement be affected? Why will there be depreciation? Because of the supply of dollar has reduced. How does the currency, how is the value decided? Based on demand and supply of dollar. So if people are taking out money, your money will lose value because people have taken out dollar. Supply of dollar will reduce. Because, yeah, still there is a difference because it is seen as more stable economy. So they are seeing stability there in the economy, earning lesser returns. Here it is unstable. You never know the rate of growth kahan jayegi, kahan nahi. And this time there is a very huge disruption in the form of the Ukraine-Russia war. So you never know how your economy will react to it. So automatically people start pulling out money. And this is taper tantrum where you are trying to increase the interest rate. You are going to taper your quantitative easing. You are reducing the easy money policy. That is why it's called taper tantrum. Tantrum because you bolte rehte hain, karte nahi. Throwing tantrums, and this is how your money, the market responds. Is this clear with respect to the movement of yield and how with relation to various variables in the economy? Any doubts here? See what happened during the 2008 financial crisis? What happened in the 2008 financial crisis? Global recession क्यों हुआ था? Goldman Sachs. Housing loans. The subprime crisis. Watch The Big Short. वो अच्छे से समझाते हैं. Big Short and there's another, The Inside Job. These two movies, they explain this in very detail, what happened in the 2008. So 2008 financial crisis, you have a slowdown. What do you do in a slowdown? A recession in most of the economies. What do you do during a slowdown? You try to put money in the hands of people. You're trying to push the consumption demand. If you have consumption, you will have investments. So what do you do for that? You reduce the interest rate. And this is what they did in quantitative easing. They reduced the interest rate to 0%. The central banks on most of the economies, they printed a lot of money, pushed it at 0% interest rate to prime the economy, to pump the economy. So if now people have a lot of money getting at 0% interest rate, and this has not stopped since 2008 financial crisis. There has been a lot of talks that we are going to taper it, we are going to stop quantitative easing. But the banks are finding it difficult, the developed economies are finding it difficult to come out of this. Now they are saying if we are going to increase the interest rate. See, if you get 0% interest rate money, today government says you have 0% interest rate money. If you get money at 0% interest rate, you will take money and spend in a lot of activities. बहुत speculation भी कर सकते हो, invest in stock market because you're getting it at 0%. Yes, this is an inflation is a definite concept, but if there is certain increase or decrease in activity, most of the money is going to speculative activities. यही try किया था कि थोड़ा inflation आएगा तो हम cover कर लेंगे. And this is what never happened. And that is why most of the money came to India. That is why your stock markets are at unbelievable levels. Most of the investment is coming through the foreign portfolio investments because people are getting easy money. And this policy is followed not in US, in Europe also. So a lot of money in your stock markets, pushing your stock markets to unbelievable levels. In fact, this FPI inflow is one of the reasons why we had an appreciated rupee. जिसकी वजह से हमारे manufacturing exports को बहुत problem है. Because if you have an appreciated rupee because of high amount of FPI inflows, you will have poor exports. The competitiveness of the exports falls. So now they're trying to come out of this quantitative easing, which is not an easy thing because a lot of money has been given out again. The problem is the growth will slow down. तो बहुत मुश्किल हो रहा है इससे निकलना. Right now, this is why it's called tantrum because they keep on announcing that we are going to increase the interest rate. So one relation is interest rate and the other is if the yield on the US bond increases. If the yield increases, that means also people are going to come back. So this is how your yield is related to the issues in India. Yield increase will lead to depreciation in the Indian economy because people will come out, they will take out their money. What are they? I didn't get the question. See, deposit rates भी कम है ना. Deposit rates and loans, both rates move in the same direction. A lot of people, उसके अलावा भी तो they are earning a lot of fees. It's not just the loans and the deposit, but they are the difference they are taking money for. And this 0% is the central bank is giving them money. They can still have the spread between your deposits and loans. Central bank is asking you to take this money. The 0% interest rate is from the central bank. I hope this is clear. The next is retrospective taxation. What do you understand by retrospective taxation? I'll just explain the Vodafone case. There were two cases here. Vodafone and Kane Energy. So Vodafone, you don't have to go into the details country kaun si thi. Vodafone situated in country X. A company, CGP Investments, here holding certain shares of a company called Hutch, which has business in India. What Vodafone did is, it bought the Hutch shares from CGP in this country. It did not do any transactions in India. So if any gains Vodafone is having from this transaction on the shares which it has acquired, it doesn't have to pay anything to India. In 2012, first, the government said, since the value of this transaction is deriving the value of the transaction is driven from assets which are controlled in India. इस value transaction की तो उसी से है ना जो assets India में. The underlying asset is Indian. Either you're doing the transaction here. So government said you will have to pay capital gains tax on this transaction because the underlying assets are Indian. Though you have made the transaction in an outside country, you will have to pay because Hutch was holding the assets here. 2012, this is challenged in the Bombay High Court, and court says Vodafone is correct, they are not going to pay anything because the transaction never happened on Indian soil, or it was not with any company which was Indian. High Court favored the government that yes, you have to pay, not Vodafone. Supreme Court said no, Vodafone is right, the transaction happening is not. High Court favored the government, yes, you have to pay. Supreme Court said no, Vodafone has not done a transaction in India, not done with any of the assets that were there in India, so they are not going to pay. 2012, the government comes out with the retrospective change, that this rule that if the underlying asset is Indian, you will have to pay the tax right from 1964, जब से इनकम टैक्स एक्ट आया तब से अब तक जितनी ट्रांजैक्शंस हैं, they will come under this. This is one big step taken by Pranab Mukherjee which ruined the UPA government. I hope retrospective is clear. Previous all transactions which have happened, you have to pay the capital gains tax if the underlying asset is Indian. This was retrospective taxation. Another term which is used here is bilateral investment treaty. What is a bilateral investment treaty? Two countries, for example, X and Y are dealing with amongst each other. Certain companies of X are investing in Y. Certain companies of X are investing in Y. There has to be certain protection given to that investment. That things and other matters with respect to this investment are covered in bilateral investment treaties. See, because if such things happen, for example, Vodafone case happened, Indian authorities, they overruled their own Supreme Court judgment. So they are going against the investments happening in their country. So that is why you need a neutral umpire. Because if you are investing, या तो अपना उसको ज़्यादा tax कर ही सकते हैं. Any day the courts are also not siding. A present case is also happening on this. What is happening between Amazon and Reliance? Who? Why did Amazon and Reliance went for an arbitration in Singapore? Abhi recent case hai, Amazon explained all that case in form an ad they gave in the newspaper, that what wrong things are happening to them. What is the problem here? The problem with respect to contract enforcement. Amazon had signed an agreement with one of the subsidiaries of Future Retail, that was Future Coupons. One of the provision of this agreement between Amazon and Future Coupons was that Future will never have a deal with Reliance. They could not invest directly into the Future Retail because of the problems in our laws. Direct retail में allowed नहीं है FDI. So they had done an investment in Future Coupons. One of the provisions of this was that the Future will not deal with Reliance. Third time बाद इन्होंने deal कर ली. The deal between Reliance and Future Retail, and now right now what is happening is Future के जितने stores हैं उसके payment रोक दी Reliance ने, and they are trying to sell off the assets of Future. Future Retail, Big Bazaar. Lease end कर दी है अंबानी ने, and they started selling the assets of Future. Though Amazon had won the case in Singapore, arbitration में जीत गए थे. This is arbitration is required because this contract enforcement, the Supreme Court favored in the Reliance. This is why you need a bilateral investment treaty where you need mechanisms where you have a neutral umpire on these matters. Because Amazon had invested in Future Coupons. Now when the Indian authorities are siding with Reliance, this is a problem. No future investment will come in India. That is why to protect your investments, you have bilateral investment treaties. This is the rationale for having bilateral investment treaties. And that is why Vodafone took India to arbitration outside because of the India-Netherlands bilateral investment treaty. In fact, Kane India ने तो बहुत कुछ कर दिया था. Kane India had a similar case. It had transferred some of its holdings from Kane India to its major company, and then it was trying to sell to Vedanta. So government demanded capital gains tax. They said, जब हुई ही नहीं है, transaction has not happened in your country. But Indian company said, Kane India is located here. So you will have to pay capital gains tax. So what government did is, when they were selling it to Vedanta, they freezed 10% of the shares. And the government took control. Kane India challenged this in US, challenged this in Europe in various arbitration, and the reward which they got was that sell off Indian properties. France में 20 लाख करोड़, I think there was certain amount जिसमें it said that Air India की कुछ properties है France में, you can sell these properties off. US में there are certain properties of India, sell these off. Because they've stopped your 10%. That is why these are the reasons, international humiliation, that India came out with this law that we are going to stop retrospective taxation. And we are going to return all the money, which we had asked from both Kane and Vodafone. This is the whole idea. Kane ने तो बेचना शुरू कर लिया था circle, hotels and Air India के assets थे. So I hope retrospective taxation is clear. What is the rule today? One of the important things to remember here is that the earlier transactions will not be taxed, but from after this 2012 onwards, all the transactions which derive their value from India, they will be taxed. So only the retrospective action of the law has been eliminated. The law still remains. That means if there is certain transaction happening where the underlying assets are Indian, the tax will have to be paid. Only the previous retrospective action has been cancelled. So right now, this taxation law holds. Only the retrospective action has been eliminated, and the money will be paid back to the company, both Vodafone and Kane. Based on the previous transactions. At present, if Vodafone does this or any other company does this transaction, India has the right to tax. Retrospectively apply नहीं कर रहे, but जो अभी law है वो तो है ये. Only the retrospective deals have been cancelled. That we are not going to demand, and whatever money we have taken, we are going to pay them back. The present law still stands. Another thing, in 2016, India framed its model bilateral investment treaty. And this has excluded taxation matters from it. A model bilateral investment treaty was issued by India that now if we are going to sign any bilateral investment treaties, taxation matters will not be included. That means you cannot challenge India's tax laws in any of the international tribunals. Why could Vodafone and Kane do it? Because they were taking benefits of the previous bilateral investment treaties which included taxation. This is how they were able to take India to outside tribunals. और इंडिया को एक्सेप्ट करना पड़ता because of the provisions of the bilateral investment treaty. Next is global minimum tax rate. See, there is a two-pillar taxation reform introduced. Under the first pillar, see what happens is, for example, you have a company like Google. What does Google sell in India? What services? One of the major services is you can sell ads on the Google platforms, right? Google is a US company for selling this ads in India. It is having कोई फिजिकल प्रेजेंस की कोई जरूरत नहीं है. You just have to sell your ad space. You can negotiate deals over your digital means. आप पैसे बेच सकते हो यूएस को whatever they are charging. You don't have to have any physical presence. Now, where is the revenue being generated? Revenue is being generated in India, but India is not getting any. India is not getting any tax. Similarly, you have another company, say Amazon.in. Sorry, Amazon.com, not in. .com US company है. There's a difference between Amazon.com and Amazon.in. Products भी different, सब कुछ different है. If you want to buy certain things from Amazon.com in India, does this company have a physical presence here? It is just shipping its products and is earning revenue from India. And there is again no tax. Since the company doesn't have any presence, the presence is completely digital. All its operations are in other countries, but it is generating revenue here, both by selling ads and by selling e-commerce, or it could be any operations. Anyone could be selling services in India without a physical presence. So the country here is losing revenue. Similar things have been happening around the world, where certain digital companies can offer you services without having any physical presence. So the OECD Pillar 1 says we are going to tax those companies even if they don't have physical presence. But are generating revenue. This is your Pillar 1. Trying to tax digital companies which don't have a physical presence in a territory but are generating revenue there. This is your Pillar 1. We are going to have tax for this. More than 10% of their revenue will be treated as profits, and this will be taxed at 25%. This is the proposal. This is the proposal that 25% will be taxed and profits are defined as more than 10% of the revenue. This Pillar 1 is for taxing digital companies which did not have any presence. The second pillar is to tackle base erosion and profit shifting. How does this happen? सबसे बड़ी कंपनी सबसे ज्यादा करती है ये. US is company situated in Apple. Oh, sorry. Apple is situated in US. It has opened a subsidiary in what country? Ireland. And it is showing its profits in Ireland. Most of its profits is coming for Ireland. For example, if it is earning say $100 here, it is showing that most of it comes from Ireland. यहाँ पे बचा effectively $20. It is earning profits from its subsidiary. This is called base erosion. You have eroded your base from $100 to $20. This is base erosion, and this step is your profit shifting. You have eroded the base at your home country and have shifted the profits to a subsidiary. Why does a company do that? Tax, because the tax liability here might be 20%, Ireland says 5%. To reduce its tax liability, the company will shift its profit to a subsidiary country, where subsidiary in another country where the tax rates are low. Now the second pillar says you have a minimum tax rate of 15%. If $80 पे 5% है, the extra 10% on this $80 will be levied by US. Now you can levy an extra 10% on the company if it is giving less than 5% or less than 15. Extra 10 आप खुद impose कर लो. This is the global minimum tax rate proposed by OECD as a two-pillar model. One pillar with respect to taxing your digital companies which don't have a physical presence, and second pillar to enforce a global minimum tax rate. This is called your global anti-tax base erosion. Sorry, anti-base erosion. Global anti-base erosion. Globe rules. This I'll explain. I hope this is clear. These have been proposed by OECD, a global minimum tax rate of 15%, and ये उन companies पे होगा having revenues more than 750 million. Large companies are being targeted. 6,400 crores, $66. If a company, most of your FDI, which are the two largest sources of FDI for India? Singapore and Mauritius. Why? Tax rates are low. They will invest in India through this. And one of the reasons others is India has a double taxation avoidance agreement. If your investments are taxed here, they will not be taxed in India. These now are being amended by India to have certain tax in India also. This is how they do it. Double taxation avoidance agreement. India is reforming these things. So they will start a company here in Singapore and they will establish all its business here. And then a subsidiary will work here in India. Say for example, US will start a company in Singapore. Why did Vodafone buy the Hutchison share from Singapore from CGP Investments in Singapore? Why was not a direct arrangement in India? Because of the low taxes here. The whole thing happened through this to this. Because there were low taxation rates in these countries. See, one thing which you can see from here is that this minimum tax rate is 15% is not a very big figure. India में effective tax rate is 25% for corporate. So India के लिए कोई major benefit नहीं है. India doesn't have to reduce or nothing is going to change. Major thing which is going to change is for the low tax countries, for example Ireland, because now they are not offering any benefit. A lot of low developed economies, they are complaining that they will not have their sovereign right to impose a tax of their own choosing. और ये एक वो step लेते थे to attract investments. Or why would you think I am such a small country, Apple will go to Ireland? Another problem which India is facing due to this is that under the first pillar, when a tax rate is decided, when this thing is being accepted and if it will come in implementation, all the taxes which you already levy on these countries, they will have to go. And what does India do? India already has a equalization levy. इस पे भी UPSC has asked a question. So when Google, without having digital presence, is earning ad revenue from India, India is taxing this. And this is called your equalization levy. Already India is taxing the ad services. Recently an amendment was made and even e-commerce companies were included under equalization levy. 6% का equalization levy था that you are going to deduct from your revenue and pay to the Indian sources. For example, Indian company X had bought certain ads on Google. So you're going to have 6% on your revenue you are going to pay here in India. This is equalization levy. The amendment is this only कि पहले सिर्फ ad की services पे था ये tax. Now the amendment is that even e-commerce companies are being introduced, that the Amazon.com, Nike.com, which are US companies not having any presence in India. So their revenue will also be taxed in India. That was the equalization levy introduced. UPSC asked a question that this equalization levy was introduced under which act? They had given two statements. It was introduced as an amendment to Income Tax Act or a separate act. ये क्वेश्चन यूपीएससी ने पूछा था when this equalization levy, or we called it as the Google tax. It was introduced that year. Same year UPSC asked a question. Now, a problem for Indian companies would become, India would become that if that is accepted, you will have to eliminate all types of equalization levy. आप खुद का अपना आप कोई टैक्स नहीं लगा सकते. When the global this has been achieved, this is how this will work, and you cannot have your own taxations. And problem with the second is, see, problem majorly second के साथ ये है कि most of the benefits will be given to the developed economies. Because most of these companies which were using these tax havens are based in developed countries. Apple had started a subsidiary in Ireland. So now who gets the power to tax Apple? It will be US. So now Ireland will lose tax revenue, Apple will gain tax revenue. So most of these companies are there in your developed economies. And secondly, the problem is it has placed a very high threshold value. बहुत कम कंपनीज का इतना टैक्स होना, इतना रेवेन्यू होगा. So these are certain problems with this. But majorly, the idea of global minimum tax rate, it's a two-pillar document. One, taxing digital companies, and second, having a global minimum tax rate. Any doubts here? Profits. Google is selling ad revenue. Google is, okay, you have a company, for example, Vision IAS. You see Vision IAS ad on YouTube, or you see a Vision IAS ad on Google page. So Google is charging money for that. Google is not here. 6% is being taxed here in India. The company will deposit it to Indian authorities. Previously, you were not taxing. Google was taking all revenue. Now you have introduced a tax. This you will have to check, revenue or profit. ऐसा revenue पे है शायद. I don't remember exactly. I think it's on revenue itself. But there is a tax now that the Indian company will pay to the Indian authorities. Google तक नहीं जाएगा उतना. Earlier this was not taxed. So Vision was paying, for example, in this case, was paying the whole amount to Google. And Google was showing this revenue in US, not in India. So you are earning from here, but you are not paying any tax here. This is why it was called equalization. That you are earning money from here, pay a certain tax. It was started with ad services. Then later, that is why it was called as Google tax. Later, it has been extended to e-commerce services also. Because a lot of international websites, this tax will not work on Amazon.in. To be very clear, Amazon.in is Indian company. Amazon.com is a foreign e-commerce. Nike.com is foreign e-commerce. eBay.com is foreign e-commerce. From buying from those countries, you will have to pay tax. This is equalization levy. Next is non-tax direct monetization of fiscal deficit. So this direct monetization was questioned in, इसका relevance इसलिए because pandemic. During the pandemic, your GDP has to come from 4 sources, and pandemic mein people are not spending, companies are not investing, and the whole global environment is again not giving you much. Who is left? Government will have to, if government has to increase the expenditure, it has to borrow. From where does it borrow? This borrowing is what we are fiscal deficit. This has to enlarge. ये 9% ऊपर चला गया था. Right now it is around 6.6%. After the pandemic, during the pandemic, is upwards of 9%. Now, where do you borrow? One is market. Now, if government borrowings in the market increase, what happens? This borrowing increases. That means crowding out. And crowding out would not be a good phenomenon because you are trying to push investments also. Further, if government has to borrow more, crowding out, one is your funds are reduced, and also cost of borrowing increases. Cost of borrowing increases, this we have seen. हायर फिस्कल डेफिसिट में yield increase हो जाता है. If yield is increasing, government security being the benchmark for interest rates, cost of borrowing will increase in the economy. If borrowing has to increase, one is definitely crowding out. What is the other impact? वो तो crowding out हो गया. What is the impact on the government? You have a significant debt burden. That means your interest payments will rise. We've already seen government debt to GDP high. So this one mechanism which normally the government is doing is becoming unsustainable because already government has a lot of borrowing. If it borrows more from the market, it will push out investments from other players, and also it will incur a lot of debt burden, increased interest payments which the future governments will pay. In this case, BJP. अगले 50 साल तक उन्होंने रहना है. So interest payments will increase, they will have to pay. Now what is the other source of financing this fiscal deficit? What is the other source of financing? One is external borrowing. Does government issue government securities in the external market? Has the government done this? When? This was recently, previous year, there was a study by the RBI only that can we issue government securities in the outside market. And it was seen as was not supported, and the government shelved the plan. So externally, government doesn't issue government securities. How does it finance fiscal deficit then? Disinvestment. See, disinvestment is a very lengthy process. Even if the government decides, it's not very efficient that it can do. Last year, what was the target for fiscal disinvestment? 1.75 or 1.9? Okay, 1.75. What could it do? What could it achieve? Just 75 lakh crores it could achieve. It would also take the figures what they were doing for LIC. 75 crore में LIC की disinvestment figures भी count कर ली थी, which they had not yet done. So disinvestment is not an easy step. How will the government get money? This I'll tell you, we stopped. RBI print money. Direct monetization. The government will have, this is not a loan, this is not wage and means advances. This is directly asking the RBI to print money and give to the government for government expenditure. This is what we'll talk about. We had stopped this direct monetization in 1997. It was replaced by wage and means advances. Since this was an agreement between RBI and the government, this was not well followed. Till 2006, this used to happen. Direct monetization in some form was happening. 2006, FRBM completely abolished this. Now by law, you will not be allowed any direct monetization. ये फिर भी हो रहा था because it was an agreement, still they were asking RBI to print money. 2006, FRBM by law says direct monetization you will not do. 2018, there is an escape clause introduced in the FRBM. FRBM is amended, an escape clause is introduced that in case of certain emergencies or certain volatilities, you can ask the RBI to print money. This is why the name escape. That though it is banned, in case of emergencies, you can allow direct monetization. And that is why direct monetization was a mechanism which was explored during the pandemic, that should we print money or not for financing the government deficit, because the other mechanisms there were a lot of problems. This was not done, just explored. Why was it not done? Why will the global confidence reduce? Yes. This is the only reason why this was not done. Inflation in the economy without any backing of supply of goods and services, you are just printing money. Increasing the supply of money will cause a runaway inflation. This is the reason why we had cancelled this, and this is the reason why we did not adopt. See, there is another form of monetization which happens. The term mentioned, there is indirect monetization already happening. What is indirect? This is directly the government is asking them to print money. That means direct monetization, the primary issuance. Government security जो issue होता है RBI को, it is directly the first. The government is giving government security and is taking money back. और monetize ये ऐसा होता है कि RBI never lets this government security reach maturity. It will again and again renew, keep on renewing. क्योंकि अगर mature कर लिया फिर तो वापस देना पड़ेगा, interest भी देना पड़ेगा. The RBI never takes it up at maturity. It keeps on renewing the government security. That is why it is monetization. It is not a loan. It is coming free of cost, asking the RBI to print money. There is another form of monetization which happens. Again, where it is indirect monetization. Monetization means RBI is printing money. When does RBI do that? और कहां से RBI government securities खरीद सकता है? Open market operations, where the RBI can buy government securities in the secondary market, stock market से it can buy government securities. Again, to buy this government securities, you have to print money. That is why it is called indirect monetization. During the open market operations, if the RBI increases this open market operations, you are doing this. But what is the role of open market operations in the economy? Yes, OMOs is to control inflation and also money supply. This is not a tool for financing fiscal deficit. This will be an abuse of power by the RBI, and that is why global confidence will reduce. If you are asking the RBI to print money for directly or indirectly, there is no separation of powers between the government and the RBI, reducing the confidence in your regulator. RBI has to act independently of the government. If it is not, this will reduce the confidence. That means, what is the mandate of RBI? Mandate of RBI is major mandate क्या है? Along with growth, stability. This is the mandate. This is not the mandate to help government tide out over fiscal deficit. So if you are doing certain things under the pressure of the government, so this can be exploited anytime. Major problem ये भी था, then any problem the government will use this escape clause and ask the RBI to print money. This is the reason why it was not done, because it is the problem of inflation and also the credibility of the RBI. I hope it is clear. Twice UPSC has asked this question, that what would be the most inflationary amongst the four? Printing money, increase in demand and everything, this can be changed with respect to changing the supply and other things. Here you are just printing money without any consequent change, putting in rupee in the market. Is this clear? And this was not done. This option was explored because market borrowings would lead to problems. So ये government ने नहीं किया. The government did not ask the RBI to print money. Directly it can do by taking the primary issuance, indirectly through open market operations. The impact is the same, because whenever the RBI will buy, it has to print money. Is this clear? And what is the difference? This allowed and not allowed, these things can be asked. 2066, it was not, FRBM cancelled it. 2018, the government introduced an escape clause in FRBM which allows printing of money by the RBI, direct monetization of deficit. No, government has never. In fact, this was proposed. इसका alternate solution ये आया कि why are you not increasing the limit for the FPIs to invest in government securities? It will have the same impact. Foreign portfolio investors can invest in government securities in India. So increase the limit how much they can invest. उन्हीं का पैसा तो आप बाहर जाके लेने चाह रहे हो, वो यहीं आके ले लो. Next is national monetization pipeline. What is national monetization? What is monetization? Monetize karna. Government has certain what is the difference between brownfield and greenfield? Greenfield is new, brownfield is old one. So in brownfield assets, the government is giving you monetization rights and not ownership. That means you can use and develop and get money for it. A percentage of it you will give back to the government. Monetizing your assets, giving it to private players to develop and use it, generate revenue from it, and give a part of revenue to your government. This is national monetization pipeline. A part of it has to be given to the government. The government is giving you monetization rights. One of the important things to note here is that you don't get the ownership rights. Ownership नहीं है, सिर्फ कुछ टाइम के लिए ट्रांसफर किया जाएगा assets. And this will be done through structured models. For example, there will be certain contract-based agreements. What are the different modes in PPP? You have certain models such as build, operate, transfer. What does the government do here? The government allows the private sector to bring all money, build the infrastructure, operate it, and then at the end of the lease period, give it back to the government. Similarly, these contract-based agreements you will have, for example, operate, maintain, and transfer. This will be a operate, maintain, develop. See, अब ये सब कुछ लिखा हुआ है in your document. Even I'll share a PPT, I'll explain again. The other is your structured financing models. Apart from your contracts, you have different models such as the investment trust, the infrastructure investment trust and real estate investment trust. What are these? What are infrastructure investment trust and real estate investment trust? How? Like a mutual fund, yes. So how will this work here? Here it is clear that private sector you will give on contract basis. Then you will also, you can do it through infrastructure, investment trust and real estate investment trust. See, this is your infrastructure investment trust. For example, PGCIL Power Grid is a company which has started an investment trust. This investment trust is getting a lot of money from different players. Investment trust works like a mutual fund. It sells units to a lot of players to pool in money. Now this infrastructure investment trust will buy the asset. The difference here is there is one private player or a consortium directly taking. This is a structured finance where this model is taking money from a lot of people to buy a government asset to run the asset. This is the structured financing model. Having an infrastructure investment company or a real estate investment company buying the asset from the government for developing it. On return, they will give back. Infrastructure trust. The trust will buy, उसका कुछ भी returns होंगे अपने players को देंगे and also a part of it to the government. The government is giving you the asset. The other is your lease model. For example, you have Jio operating in telecom. It has taken lease over certain government land or taken spectrum on lease from the government. BSNL के अपने assets हैं. This is extended to the lease. Certain assets break इसके बाद. Certain assets of the government will given to an already company which has a government lease for certain service provision. Jio ने lease लिया है providing certain service to your players. The government asset will be extended to this lease. This is lease is taken from the government. Lease is on rent. Certain assets have been taken on rent for the government to provide certain service. Assets और add कर देंगे इस lease में to the already existing player. This is how national monetization pipeline will work. Three things to be very clear. One, it is happening on brownfield assets which are already being constructed, but the government is not able to take out value from it. For example, government created a road, but government did not get any revenue, is not getting any benefit. So government on contract can give the road to a private player. For example, L&T, ILFS, किसी को भी road दे दिया कि आप चलाओ, toll collect करो, give certain percentage of revenue to us. These are three different models. Secondly, it will be a shift of monetization rights, not ownership. Government will not give ownership of the assets. The assets will still be owned by the government. Government is just giving monetization rights. And the third thing, it will be a structured finance models. That means there will be specific contracts. There will be key performance indicators that how you are performing, what activity you are doing. It will be a complete structured financing. It will not be a agreement के किसी को भी दे दिया without any consideration. This is your national monetization pipeline. Any doubts what is happening here? What could be the issue in this? Government can give the land to the preferential. See, ये सब में bidding होगी, ऐसा कुछ auction system होगा. This is the reason structured financing models. Exactly. There's a reason why there is no revenue from it, because, for example, if a road is constructed, there is no traffic. For private sector to come and invest in government assets, there has to be certain recognizable revenue stream. Major issue इसमें ये आएगा that how you are going to attract the private sector to take the investments on the assets where you are not functioning. Only the good performing assets will be taken by few players. Most of the assets will not be taken up. What could be the other problem here? Exactly. The major problem which is happening in all the PPP arrangements in India is your contracts. The contract design and then the disputes based on this. Why don't we have good private PPP arrangements in India? Government calls out private players to invest. PPP projects are not a very big success in India because of the poor contract design. The contracts are inflexible. If there are certain issues with respect to with pricing, you will have dispute. You don't have independent sector regulators to solve the disputes. Most of the sector regulators are government bodies only. So dispute resolution नहीं होता. That is why you don't have PPP investments. This is again a type of PPP investments. The only difference is most of the PPP government does is in greenfield. Metro banao, road banao. This is happening in all in brownfield. They are giving the already created asset to monetize it. These are all PPP arrangements. Is this clear? Major problems is the contract design and enforcement of contracts with respect to these arrangements. Unlock idle capital and reinvesting in assets. So the government plan with national monetization pipeline is that it will generate money, private will generate money, there will be revenue, this will be shared with the government, and government then is going to use this money for infrastructure creation. उन assets से पैसा मिलेगा, पैसे से हम नया काम करेंगे. This is what the government idea is. Underutilized assets to private hands without transferring ownership. Core assets. See, there is a difference between core and non-core assets. Core assets are those assets which are important for the business to work. For example, there are certain facilities which are important for you to work. And non-core assets are those which are lying idle, which you are not using. For example, there could be certain PSUs holding certain land. So those are non-core assets. Core assets are which are important for your business. The government is basically transferring revenue rights to private for period in return of upfront money. Three major things. Brownfield de-risked assets. Why is it called de-risked? What is the risk in creation of assets? PPP के major problem PPP में ये है that all the risk is with the private sector. Because private is coming with the 100% of the money. In your BOT projects, which is the conventional PPP projects, private is bearing the 100% risk because the 100% money is being invested by the private. It is de-risked because the asset is already created. यहाँ 100% money invest करके asset बनाना है, क्या पता clearance नहीं मिले. There is certain disputes, आधे में छोड़ना पड़े. Risk तो पूरा इनका 100%. What is the defining feature of the hybrid annuity model? Have you heard of this term, hybrid annuity model? Here the risk is shared. Government brings in 40% money. 60% is brought by the private player. ये ham इसलिए लाया गया कि reduce करो private का risk. Nobody is coming to take the upfront risk. So government says we are going to take 40% of the risk. 60% you invest. And why is it annuity? These 60% will be given back to you in annual payments. Toll rights यहाँ पे government के होते हैं. NHA I will consider the toll. ये 60% इनको वापस तो चाहिए because they are investing with certain profits. So government based on their performance gives back the 60% in 5 installments in 5 years. The government is sharing the risk. In generic PPP models such as BOT, 100% risk is of the private. That is why brownfield de-risked because the asset has already been created. Secondly, monetization of rights and not ownership. You are not going to get ownership. The government is going to take the asset back. And it will be a competitive bidding mechanism. There will be structured models. Direct contracts. You will have different type of PPP contracts for the same. Structured financing through investment trusts and long-term leases. Already certain assets have been leased to certain private player. उसी existing player को extra lease मिल जाएगी for the extra assets. This is how you are going to implement national monetization pipeline. Any doubts here? Next is land banks. See, land banks is a very small topic, nothing much to discuss. The government has a lot of state governments and state government PSUs have a lot of vacant land which they are not using, vacant, unutilized, and also tax delinquent, where the state governments, there was certain tax liability of certain people, they could not pay the tax, government ne land le liya. A lot of properties, these type of properties which the state government is not able to use, it is in the name of state governments. What they will do is, they will consolidate all these properties in a consolidated land bank for its effective utilization. Creating a land bank, a company to manage all these resources, having all type of information, GIS coordinates and all, that if there is certain investment to be made in the state, आप इस land bank से consult कर लो where you can get. This is just management of these vacant, unutilized and tax delinquent properties in one land bank. This is government repository of land. It will provide you all information. If you want to open a new area, there is certain land acquisition which has to take place. So you can come to this company and ask for certain land. Government will help you in acquisition. This is a land bank. This is the company which has been established, the Industrial Land Bank Portal. Information on all land, GIS on clusters, GIS portals, external infrastructure, all information in this land bank. See, there is, what is the law for acquisition of land in India? There's a central legislation for land acquisition. Land Acquisition, Rehabilitation and Resettlement Act. Why do we have a central legislation on land acquisition when land is a state subject? Fundamental rights. It's not a model act. For uniformity, but for uniformity you should have the mandate. State law mein agar land is a state subject, how can center make a law? Land acquisition is a concurrent subject. That is why you have both center and state laws. If a state law is created, your center laws will not be valid. When can state laws work? Even when you have a center law. A lot of states have done this to bypass the Land Acquisition Act. They have passed their own state laws and got the presidential assent to work over the Land Acquisition Act. One of the provisions under the Land Acquisition Act is, if the government acquires the land and gives it to the private player, if the land is unused, what will happen? If unused for 5 years, it will either return to the owners or will go to the state government land bank. A lot of states have a lot of land in their land banks, which was taken under this provision also. हर स्टेट का बहुत लैंड बैंक्स क्रिएटेड हैं विद रिस्पेक्ट टू दीज वेकेंट अनयूटिलाइज्ड टैक्स डेलिंक्वेंट एंड आल्सो acquired land which was not being used. And one of the major problems with state land banks is that it has acquired a lot of land by force. ये major problem है land banks की. A lot of tribals, a lot of states, the land bank has a problem that you have not taken by choice, it is coerced. Not paid any reimbursement and have deposited the land in the land bank. See, ये था या return करो या land bank में. Most of the states have not returned, have instead captured the land in the land bank. And benefits of the land bank I think is clear. It will provide all information, effective use of land resources and all. Because you are consolidating the land resources. Any doubts here? We'll take a break of 5 minutes and then do the rest. My throat is hurting. So the next is National Multidimensional Poverty Index. How is poverty measured in India? Tendulkar committee or any committee, what did it say? 32 rupees is what? You decide a consumption basket, and you see, decide certain consumption expenditure on that basket. If someone is spending lower than this becomes your poverty line. This is how poverty line is measured, based on consumption expenditure. Poverty line is not measured as per income. It is based on how much you are doing expenditure on a basket decided by the government. This is how poverty is decided. If you are doing lesser expenditure than this, you become poor, below poverty line. This is the definition. What is the problem with this definition? One is definitely, it will, this is poor, even this person is poor. Iska kam distance hai, iska zyada distance hai. But you don't know what the intensity is. You just know the incidence. You know that they are poor, but you don't know how much poor they are. What else? What is the major problem with measuring poverty with respect to just one consumption expenditure? Basket is fixed. What else? Basket is definitely fixed. You are seeing expenditure on certain items. Exclusion, inclusion, these are statistical errors, will happen in any method. Choices. Major is, this is just showing the economic aspect. The consumption basket has certain basic necessities. Consumption basket is basic necessities. You might have certain concepts of, say, health and education, but again, it will not be as comprehensive because you are just seeing the basic things which are required for survival. It is not seeing the other aspects such as health could have different indicators, education could have different indicators, and also your standard of living is not just based on spending on food. It could be your access to electricity. It could be your access to sanitation. These are just examples. So poverty is not just economic, where you have certain money for expenditure on certain items. It could have a range of different indicators. It could be multidimensional. This is the significance of the multidimensional poverty index. To capture these domains, you have the multidimensional poverty index. Done by two bodies, UNDP and the Oxford Poverty Human Development Initiative. This can be asked in prelims, who publishes the Global Multidimensional Poverty Index. Two things are assessed here. One is the incidence, that how many people are poor. There are 10 indicators in multidimensional poverty index. Out of these 10 indicators, you are lacking on 3 indicators. You are poor. Further, it also gives you the intensity of poverty. How? Intensity कैसे आएगी? What is intensity? The extent. So if you have 10 indicators, earlier you had just one indicator. What was the indicator? Consumption expenditure. Now you have 10 indicators, so the percentage of deprivations across indicators. On an average, person is deprived on 4 indicators, 5 indicators, 7 indicators. You come to know is intensity of poverty. For example, no access to electricity, no access to sanitation. He might have food, but he might not have these services. So the intensity is measured how much indicators he is lacking. This is your incidence. If more than 3, you are poor, and on an average how much is lacking, this is your intensity. This is how you get the MPI score. Intensity into incidence. This is the MPI score, how it is derived. So multidimensional poverty index gives you incidence. If someone has more than 3, that means he is poor. And on an average, how many indicators people are poor? That is your intensity. The score is H into A. This is multidimensional poverty index. These are the indicators. For health, you have nutrition, child mortality. Education, you have years of schooling, school attendance. Then living standards has a range of indicators. What are the assets you are holding? Housing if you have, electricity, drinking water, sanitation and cooking fuel. This shows the multidimensional nature of poverty. The access to these indicators will determine the intensity and also the access. 3 से ज़्यादा पे होगे, you are poor, and if on an average, how many gives you the intensity? Is this clear? These indicators can be asked. What are the indicators for multidimensional poverty index? UPSC once asked a question on the indicators of the ease of doing business. Which of the following is not an indicator for ease of doing business? So similarly, on those lines, this can be asked. It is a weighted index. What do you understand by this? Yes. So you can see all these indicators have different weight. For example, child mortality is 1/6. Your cooking fuel is 1/18. That means all the indicators are not exactly the same. किसी index की ज़्यादा value है, for example child mortality, किसी की कम है. This multidimensional poverty index is a weighted index, assigning weight to certain indicators. All the indicators are not the same value. The major 3 are same. Education is 1/3, health is 1/3, and living standard is 33. But this cooking fuel and years of schooling are not the same, showing that years of schooling is more important. It's a weighted index. This is how it is calculated. H is the proportion of population that is multidimensional poor. When is the person poor? When 3 indicators pay, he is lacking. He becomes multidimensional poor. A is the average proportion of dimensions in which poor people are deprived. Those peoples on an average, how much they are deprived? 3 se zyada are poor. Someone might be lacking on 5 indicators, someone might be lacking on 7. So on an average, the poor people are lacking on how many indicators? That is your value of A. MPI is H into A. It will be categorized as vulnerable when you are in the range of 20 to 33%, poor more than 33%, then severe poverty when it is upwards of 50%. Poor तभी होगा जब 3 indicators 33% score से ऊपर होगा. Vulnerable in 20 to 33% of the indicators, severe poverty more than 50%. On 3 indicators, any of the 3 indicators. On the weighted indicators, any. They are multidimensional poor. I hope it is clear how MPI value is calculated. Then similar index has been prepared by Niti Aayog in line with 12 ministries, partnership with state governments, and with the help of the 2 bodies which prepares the global MPI, the UNDP and the Oxford National Multidimensional Poverty Index. What is the source of data for this National Multidimensional Poverty Index? The National Family Health Survey 4 data say it had prepared the National Multidimensional Index. Who releases this data? International Institute of Population Sciences under the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. So it's based on NFHS 4 data which is conducted by International Institute of Population Sciences under Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. These type of questions again important for prelims. How will the progress be calculated? Measured with the NFHS 5. Recently NFHS 5 data was released. So improvement will be calculated by measuring it with NFHS 5. Baseline जो national MPI 2021, it was on NFHS 4 data. These are the indicators. A slight difference from the international indicators. There are two indicators which are extra here. One is antenatal care and the other is bank account. Rest all are same. That is why changes in your weights also. Larger indexes के weight same है 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. Here it will be 1/12 because you have an extra indicator. So these two are extra in your National Multidimensional Poverty Index. This was your finding. 25% people are multidimensional poor in India. Those poor people are on an average intensity is 47.13. So your MPI figures according to National Multidimensional Poverty Index, Indian is 0.118 for rural and urban. This is the findings of your National Multidimensional Poverty Index. States. So they can ask you the first 2, 3 or the last. Which of you think is the largest? मतलब कम सबसे कम किस में होंगे? सिक्किम यहाँ से पढ़. These are your union territories. Dadar and Nagar Haveli has the highest. Puducherry has the lowest. Kerala नहीं है. Kerala, Sikkim दिख नहीं रहा पे. Kerala, Sikkim, Goa has the lowest. So your first, second, third, these things could be asked. This is the finding of your National Multidimensional Poverty Index by Niti Aayog. This is your some of your failures on certain indicators. How much of people don't get deprivation on each indicator. For example, nutrition, you have 37.6, mortality 2.7, school attendance 6.4. This is your comparison with NHFS 5. Certain indicators, what's the deprivation rate? Again, findings of the National Multidimensional Poverty Index. Next, major thing to remember here, who publishes the report and the indicators. Next is financial inclusion. What do you understand by financial inclusion? What is financial inclusion? Official part. What is unofficial? Access, affordability, and choice to the formal financial system. This is your financial inclusion. Giving people access to the formal financial system, not just making it easier, making it affordable, and also giving a choice of financial products. It's not that just giving them one product. This is your financial inclusion. There's a financial inclusion index prepared by the RBI. There are 3 indicators. Access, usage, and quality. Important thing here, who publishes the index, what are the various parameters. Then there are certain initiatives. National Strategy for Financial Inclusion 2019 to 24 and also National Strategy for Financial Education 20 to 25, both by the RBI. Government has the major scheme. What is the major scheme for financial inclusion? Jan Dhan Yojana. So I hope this is clear, mostly factual. Then there is a differentiation given here in the box, strategic and non-strategic sectors. This is important. What is disinvestment? Government, this is 100% pub. Less than 50% is disinvestment. Disinvestment, government reduces its shareholding from 100% to any, is disinvestment. This whole reduction of government shareholding is disinvestment. You can see the term itself, disinvestment. Government is taking out its share from the company. 100% से कम कर रहा है. When does it turn into private? When the government shareholding is diluted from 50%, 51% becomes private, 49% is government, this becomes, so this 50% threshold is privatization. So all privatization is disinvestment, but all disinvestment is not privatization. Is this clear? All disinvestment is not privatization because here you are still having government ownership and control. The management control remains in the hand of government. Here the management and the ownership control shifts to private hands. What is strategic disinvestment? Privatization as another name, strategic disinvestment. What is minority sale? Reduction up to 75% where the government is holding more than 75%, it is called minority sale. If the government reduces less than 75, it is called strategic minority sale. Why this? There are certain decisions with respect to the government, with respect to the company, which can be only altered with 75% majority. There are certain strategic decisions for the company which can only be taken when you have 75% majority. So if the government is diluting less than 75, the government is going 74%, that means now you will have someone else who can take part in these decisions. Government 75 से ज़्यादा होता तो government could take these decisions. That is why this is minority, this is strategic minority. And if the government is selling the PSU directly, it is strategic sale, जो government ने Air India के साथ किया. Selling the company directly to any private player. This is strategic sale. Complete privatization. I hope these terms are clear. Now, which PSUs have to be privatized and which have to be disinvested and not? They have been divided into strategic and non-strategic. Strategic sectors, the government will have the major control. Non-strategic, you will have both privatization and disinvestment. This distinction was to be made by Niti Aayog. Finally, decision taken by the ministry, by the cabinet, to divide the sectors, because now you have to take a decision where the government has to stay. कहाँ पे government, किस sectors में government perform करेगा, and all those sectors where the government will move out. So this is the division between strategic and non-strategic sectors. The strategic sector have been defined. This was given to the Niti Aayog, finally decided by the government. In सबका non-strategic का you will have merger given to the private sector, everything. Strategic sectors the government is going to remain under control. I hope this is clear, strategic, non-strategic. Then another term mentioned is K-shaped recovery. What do you understand by K-shaped recovery? How? Huh? Large firms? Before this, what is V-shaped recovery? This, I think they asked in this year mains. This year they asked question on V-shaped recovery. What is V-shaped recovery? Slowdown and rebound. This is V-shaped. What is W-shaped? You opened up the economy too fast after the pandemic. It rebounded. Again, it fell because of a new COVID wave. You opened up too fast. So, economy which was going down, it rebounded. Again, it fell because of another disruption. This is W-shaped. What is K-shaped? What is this? Certain sectors have rebounded, are growing up. Certain sectors, any two sectors which you can give an example, how K-shaped has happened? Huh? Real estate. Real estate has fallen. IT has increased. Agriculture rebounded. Agriculture never slowed down. So you cannot talk about agriculture. In fact, during the disruption also, one of the sectors which was performing was agriculture because lockdown laga bhi nahi tha. In the range of 4% agriculture had shown growth. MSMEs. Some players in the industry growing, some fallen. Even automobile sectors had seen K-shaped. How? Automobile में बहुत significantly K-shaped आया है. Chip shortage तो has led to, but still there is demand. That means people are buying automobiles. There is supply में थोड़ा disruption है. The four-wheeler segment, this was a good growth, has rebounded, and two-wheeler has slumped. ये जो टू इंडिया की पूरी कहानी है कि रूरल इंडिया wages have depressed. The demand for two-wheeler has stopped. The urban India, the ones who was performing well, for example, the IT sectors, उनकी demand four-wheeler की बढ़ गई. So this is your K-shaped recovery. One of the prime examples how in the automobile sector itself, one of them was increasing, the other was decreasing. Even in the service sector, your IT and other software services, sabka work from home. Cost in fact reduced because you don't have to pay the rent for the offices. Bonus किसी को नहीं मिले. Companies ने full on profits. And the other down. A lot of restaurants, hotels, they closed down during the pandemic because the contact-based services, you could not work from home. So services also had a K-shaped recovery. When some sectors rebounded well, some sectors did not. This is K-shaped. I hope the shapes with respect to recovery are clear. Privatization of public sector banks. Why is privatization happening in public sector banks? Privatization, I hope it is clear. हो क्या रहा है? Less than 50%. And in some cases, you are also selling the banks. What are the few banks which have been shortlisted? Privatization के लिए the government has first said 4, now is saying 2 banks. Indian Overseas and Central Bank of India. And another government bank which is not exactly government. IDBI is not government. Who holds? 45% government, 49% is LIC. Even this the government is trying to privatize, is trying to sell off these banks. Why? NPAs. What with respect to NPAs? One is definitely your public sector banks are facing a lot of NPAs. What else? The reason for privatization? Efficiency? Poor efficiency of working. Overburdened. So reduce the burden, don't sell. See, one of the reasons why public sector banks, they are against privatization is they say, हमारी efficiency इसलिए poor है because you have given us so much work. No frills account, all the major policies, Jan Dhan Yojana, giving scholarships, giving all type of money from the government accounts. So naturally your footfall for the public sector banks will be high. One of the reason what they complain is, our efficiency is low because what we do is mass banking, and what the private sector does is class banking. HDFC, Axis, ICICI, they will not open zero balance accounts. 10,000 minimum balance चाहिए for those accounts. So automatically your footfalls will be low, your efficiency will be higher. So this is one of the major debates against privatization, that they are providing a lot of welfare services which the private sector will not. And this is the reason why efficiency is lower. In fact, one of the reasons why PSUs have a lower efficiency is also because of its the demand for, there is a lot of vacancies for jobs, but the government is not filling those vacancies on time. So this is the reason why people are against privatization. They're saying improve the banks, do not privatize. But what are the reasons for PSUs privatization? Apart from this, poor efficiencies, NPAs. What is higher NPAs and poor efficiency leading to? You have poor profitability where all your deposit business and all your credit, everything is going to the private sector banks. You are seeing a declining deposit ratio for the public sector banks and also a declining credit, what the credit the public sector is disbursing. So all your profitability is now being taken towards the private sector. Who is paying the money for these banks if they are not working well? The recapitalization is done by the governments, and governments want to reduce this pressure because efficiency wise you are not able to improve. In fact, one of the major reasons for PSU is that you have connected lending, phone call aata ministry se, and you have to give the loans. One of the reasons why you have high NPAs. The recent case which has been exposed, ABG shipyard, 2000 crore se uppar is taken, all the exposure is from public sector banks. So the government is not able to improve their functioning, there is no government governance reforms. You are putting in more and more money without doing any governance reforms, your NPAs are increasing. कुछ पहले साल में कम हुए थे, now again they have started going up. This is a perfect case of moral hazard. What is a moral hazard? This is one of the reasons why the governments want to pull out of PSUs and want to privatize, because of a moral hazard. What is a moral hazard? Why? Yes, so a moral hazard is you won't change your behavior because you know you will not be reprimanded for poor behavior. People continue smoking because they know they are covered by health insurance. बीमार होंगे तो hospital cover करेगा. This is a perfect example of moral hazard. You continue having losses because you know you will not face any downturns. Government फिर आपको recapitalize करेगी. If it would have been a private sector bank, if you are facing so many losses, the private sector bank will exit. A public sector bank does not because it is backed by the government. So this is a perfect case of moral hazard because when you are doing certain wrong things, you are not punished. This is a moral hazard. That is why the government wants to take out all its services from the public sector banks and wants more and more private banks. What could be the issue with respect to privatization? What could be the issues with respect to privatization? Major issue क्या है? Not just in case of public sector banks, it could be in any case. One is you have loss of welfare. SBI has opened most Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana. उन्हीं के पास सबसे ज़्यादा accounts. It is disbursing a lot of money under various direct benefit transfers. So most of the welfare functions, most of the zero bank accounts, giving it money to the poorest sections, it is being provided, the financial services are provided by the public sector banks, which you will be which you can't enforce the private sector to do. What else? Performance. Even private fails. You have ample examples of private sector banks failing. For example, Yes Bank. ICICI, HDFC को भी अभी मिला था, but they could not run their digital operations well. Paytm Payments Bank has been stopped from onloading new customers. So there's no guarantee that private will infuse efficiency. What else? Threat to financial stability, how? RBI is a regulator for both. RBI will regulate, it will place restrictions, it will place you under the prompt corrective action if you're not performing well. So this is not how, but there is another thing which, there's chances how? How connected lending? So this corruption can be controlled by RBI. For example, वो जो केस हुआ था वीडियोकॉन को पैसे दिए थे चंदा कोचर ICICI. So these things can be controlled because you have a sector regulator RBI. But otherwise you have threats to financial stability. How? Corruption is not the case. You are concentrating. Who will have the capacity to buy these banks? The only banks which are performing well, they have the market control. ये privatization not just with respect to banks, with respect to any sector. The ones who are performing well, for example, in oil sector, who has the capacity to buy ONGC? Reliance. So already who is the market dominant player, he will gain all the more power. Market control will happen, will be concentrated only in few players. And this has the threats to financial stability. Now when the banks become too big to fail, even during the 2008 financial crisis, there were few private banks which were saved by the government. Lehman Brothers को वो support नहीं मिला था. So similarly, when you become too big to fail, this whole thing happened in the case of 2008 financial crisis in India also. ICICI Bank had the largest exposure to Lehman Brothers, and people were losing confidence in ICICI. जब तक फाइनेंस मिनिस्टर ने जाके नहीं बोला कि all is well with ICICI, it did not stop. Now you consider you will have just 2-3 major players who will hold the banks. So market control will be there in 2-3 players also. See, corruption and connected lending have to be controlled by the regulator. और connected lending के ज़्यादा chances PSUs में है, where you are giving loans without any due diligence, which happened in the case of Vijay Mallya. IDBI से 6,000 करोड़ का लोन मिला just on the collateral of the brand name of Kingfisher. अरुण जेटली खुद बिठा के गए थे उनको एयरप्लेन में कि जाओ, बहुत हो गया, बहुत पैसे खा गए. What other could be the problem with privatization? A major problem. In fact, disinvestment का major problem is that this is the reason why the government is not able to do. Have you heard of the recent case of Central Electronics Limited? Recently in news with respect to privatization and disinvestment. See, if you are going into private, no idea. So, major problem क्या है disinvestment में? Valuation. At what price you have to sell? At what price you have to disinvest? If the share price or if you are selling the whole company. How do you value the company? The Central Electronics Limited has been sold for 220 crores. You know how much land Central Electronics Limited is holding? गाजियाबाद में प्राइम एरिया में सर्कल रेट के हिसाब से 440 करोड़ का लैंड इट इज होल्डिंग. मार्केट वैल्यू इज एस्टिमेटेड अराउंड 660 crores. This is, I'm just saying, unutilized land which this PSU is holding, and it has been sold for just 220 crores. Forget about rest of the assets. 440 crores का तो सिर्फ land है उनके पास. This is circle rate. Market rate से it is upwards of 650 crores. Forget its book value, forget everything orders which it has placed. Only 2 people bid for this company. Both of them were connected. Same thing, even in Air India, a lot of people say that the government has sold it for a very less price. Government has taken most of the debts of Air India. Even the medical bills, the pensions, everything will be paid by government. 20,000 crore is the only amount. The second bid was by Indigo, 15,000 or 14,000. Nakli bid. So valuation of assets becomes a very big problem at what price you are selling, and this leads to a very big loss to the exchequer. There was an investigation report on Central Electronics Limited. The person who had bought this, it is linked to the ruling party. So disinvestment, privatization, same thing. Why is the government not disinvesting in LIC right now? They've shifted the plans to next month. Because they know they're not going to get a good share price because of the market conditions. So how did they decide the market price, the valuation of assets, and how they have to sell the company? That becomes a major problem. Another issue with respect to privatization, why people complain is, 2 दिन से भारत बंद चल रहा है. Job loss. You will have rationalization of manpower as soon as private sector comes. One of the major, you can include this in loss of welfare also, is your there will be no reservation. Government PSUs have reservation. This is now completely gone. Because private sector is not bound by any of the reservation benefits. Secondly, you will have a job loss because rationalization of manpower, you have a lot of high paying. PSUs ka one of the major reasons for establishing PSUs was employment, and employment at good cost. Even though lower grade employees get a lot of money. Clerks 80,000. Private sector 8,000 bhi dega. And this is a major problem with the people who have crossed 40 years. Because they can't reskill and get absorbed in the sector. Rest, they can still get those jobs here in the private sector or some other company. So this is with respect to your privatization. Prompt corrective action, and next we'll do in the next class.